Hello everybody, and welcome to another studio session. Today I'm going to demystify my workflow when it comes to creating drones on the MicroFreak. There are multiple styles of drone music, so whatever I will be showing you today is by no means a definitive or an exhaustive guide on how to make your own drone music, but I will still try to break it down into simple principles that you can keep in mind whenever you're working on your own drones. So without any further introductions, let's begin. Alright, so I have an initial patch loaded up so we can all start at the same point. I would also like to say that throughout the entirety of this video I'm going to be using a free reverb plugin called Valhalla Supermassive, and I'm doing that because if I used something like the Zoom Multistomp, then people could get discouraged because they don't have all the gear. Which brings me to my first point, which is that drone music relies heavily on the sense of space. And the sense of space can be introduced very easily into your compositions by adding reverb. Personally, I gravitate towards big reverbs like Hall, Cathedral, and some of the abstract ones, but if you prefer smaller reverbs, nothing is stopping you from doing that. Okay, so reverb will do a lot of heavy lifting, even on the initial patch. The sense of space that it adds also provides a lot more interest to that one single note without any modulation. Dropping it 2 octaves, it gets even cooler. And that could be your gateway to creating your own drone music. And as cool as that is, if I just press hold and picked a note and walked away for an hour, this would get pretty boring really quickly. And worse yet, it could get really annoying because you have a constant tone that's not changing at all. And the way to combat that boringness and the annoyance of it is to add some modulation, which is the second point that I would like to highlight, because a lot of the drone music that's actually really interesting and intricate has a lot of slow, ever-evolving movement, right? Or at least that's the drone music that I gravitate towards. So we can add a sense of movement by modulating any of the parameters on the MicroFreak. So the way I would approach it would be to actually press hold and pick a note, and then start with the modulation matrix and try to find something that will provide some more interest to it. So for now I can pick C, and let's browse through the oscillators, see if we find something that provides the vibe that we're looking for right now. Okay, I found the vibe. The vibe that I'm feeling right now is the harmonic oscillator, and the first thing that I always like to do is to try and find a sweet spot for every parameter. So I will just press the note a few times and try to figure out where I like the sound to be. And it's very abstract, because I like it when it's subby like that, but I also like the harmonic content that's being added to it. And I would say that this, for me personally, it's too much of the harmonic content, because there's this resonant higher pitch that to me would get pretty annoying really quickly. So let me back it off. And alright, somewhere around 60 I feel like it sounds pretty well. And now what I will do is I'm going to lower this parameter down to 30, and I'm going to use our modulation matrix to modulate it. I'm going to scroll up until the LFO modulates the wave parameter, and I'm going to modulate it by 30, because that will mean that our LFO will make it go up to 60 and down to 0. And that will make sure that we're hitting the two sweet spots and everything in between. My favorite type of modulation for drone music is the last type of LFO, which is basically randomly going up and down, but it's not as jumpy as sample and hold. And another thing that I really like to do is press the rate knob to desynchronize the LFO and make it as slow as possible, because then all the changes will be really gradual, which in turn will provide more interest to our drone. So now we have one modulation happening very slowly over time, very gradually, right? And now we can start experimenting with other parameters that we would like to modulate. So when I turn the timbre knob, I'm not necessarily a fan of all the buzzing harmonics. They can be cool, but I would like them to appear more periodically, and I would also like to have some more context for dialing them in. So let me experiment with the shape. Which at this point, I honestly can barely tell a difference what it does. Let me maybe try a higher note. Honestly, I have a really hard time determining what it does. You know what? When I have a very hard time determining what a parameter does, I usually modulate it by the cycling envelope, and I'm setting the amount to be very extreme and the tempo of the cycling envelope to be really fast, so then I can more easily determine what the hell is going on. And now we hear that it does something. Okay, so as you probably heard, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Right now, I'm not sure how much of the modulation would I like to have, and if I would like to modulate any of those parameters, but that's the thing. You don't have to commit to anything. For now, I can leave it, for example, on, let's say, 40. And now it's just going to do its own thing. And I don't really like the clicking in the lower register, so maybe I will make it a bit slower. Oh, that's really cool. And mind you, all of this is happening while I'm holding one note and changing stuff by 1-2 milliseconds. So I think that I'm going to modulate the amount, so this modulation comes and goes randomly. To do that, I have to reach around my microphone and press the assign to button, and oh, it was already assigned. Okay, that's cool. And I'm going to modulate it with our LFO, and I'm going to modulate it by minus 100, because I have this knob set to 100, and if I go minus, it will just go back and forth and possibly hold it for a second. I'm not necessarily sure how the LFO on the MicroFreak works, but hey, that's something for me to look into. That also can show you that you don't have to understand everything that's going on under the hood. You can just experiment and see if you like how it sounds, and that's the most important thing when working on any sort of music. So let's hear what that does right now. Alright, it sounds pretty interesting. Now we can modulate the filter cutoff, which is going to darken and brighten our sound depending on where it's positioned. It's pretty much a staple of drone music, or at least the drone music that I gravitate towards. And I'm going to modulate the filter cutoff by a smaller amount, let's say maybe 14. It doesn't really matter what number you use, it's just going by feel, more or less. And the reason why I don't modulate it by a bigger number is the fact that I like to tweak it myself when I'm filming my YouTube jams. And then I can decide, because sometimes when I close it off and it modulates between a smaller range, it still has a sense of motion, but at the same time I can decide, for example, even if I play a higher note, it still has that filter motion, but it's not as aggressive as if I made it more prominent, let's say. So just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to modulate it by a bigger amount, like 100. And the LFO is very slow, but it's not going to be as predictable as when it is in a smaller range. Because right now, our drone completely died, right? Because the range of motion for the LFO is so huge. So usually I like to stick to smaller numbers and just tweak things by hand. Okay, 13, let it be. And yeah, just like that, we added some more motion to our drone. Resonance can also be a very interesting tool, although depending on the oscillator, it can be a little bit tricky to use. I generally try to approach with caution, and luckily for you, if it goes to a very loud squeal, I'm just going to turn it down in post. But more or less you can tell if the resonance is going to actually destroy your headphones. Because this one, not very likely to do so. And that's how you can get more intricate wailing sounds on top of your single note. But once again, I would advise you to proceed with caution, always use a limiter, never try to work on high volumes, because if you're working on an already high volume, not only you're hurting your hearing, but also if a resonance sweep turns out to be very resonant, it may be very unpleasant. But that's another trick that you can have up your sleeve when working on music like this. So now, let's actually see if we can figure out where the timbre parameter has its sweet spot. Okay, when the filter is more open, somewhere around 40 sounds good to me. So I'm going to lower it to 20. And I'm going to modulate it by, let's say, -20. So the way I think it works is that if you put a positive value like 20, it goes up first, and when you put a negative value, it goes down first. But I'm not sure how it is with the random modulation, if it modulates bidirectionally at the same time, or is it just unifying it? If you know how it behaves, feel free to let me know in the comments. And once again, we come back to the point, you don't have to know what you're doing 100% of the time to get good sounding results. Another thing I sometimes like to do is to modulate the same parameter with two different sources. So, for example, right now we're modulating the timbre with the LFO, but I'm also going to modulate it with the cycling envelope. And I'm going to do it by, let's say, +12, and let's hear how that sounds. Since that modulation is way faster, it's probably going to produce interesting results. So yeah, let's hear it. And let's try making the modulation more extreme and see if it behaves in a very interesting and intriguing way. Okay, so that very high subtle harmonic comes from that fast oscillation through the cycling envelope. And as the LFO modulates the amount, that subtle higher note disappears. And now it reappears again. Cool, I like it. I'm really vibing with this. Another thing that I like to do with my drones is to mess around with pitch. And I'm doing it by a very, very small increments. So for example, with cycling envelope, I'm going to modulate it by 0.5. Because the more we add, the more unstable it gets. Although sometimes it also can produce interesting results. For now, I'm going to leave it at 0.3 with the cycling envelope, and I'm going to do -0.3 on the LFO. And another thing I like to do is to modulate the pitch with the pressure. So if I put it at 1 and pick a note, so basically the more of my finger touches the conductive board, the higher the pitch goes. If I make it something super stupid and extreme, we go into that territory, which we don't want. But general rule that I use is anywhere between 0.3 to 1. And that produces some very nice, weird, atmospheric bands of notes. So one way I would use it in my jam, for example, would be when I hold down a note and then I press a different note. Maybe right now it's too subtle. How about 1.2? And so far we were working in the mono mode, right? So it's only one note at a time. But if we press the paraphonic button, we can play a few notes at a time. So sometimes I would do something like, for example, hold down one note and try to improvise with the other hand. Yeah, whatever, something like that, right? And another thing that we could do is to make a sequence and let it play and then improvise on top in higher register. So we press Shift and ARP/sequence. Now we're in a sequencer mode. So we can press this button that says random and has the little recording dot next to it. And I'm going to hold this and I'm going to press the tie/rest button, and on the fifth step, let's say I'm going to add more notes from the C minor scale, and I'm also going to hold them for a while, and maybe on the step 9 I'm going to pick those notes, and then I'm just going to press the rest button for the rest of the steps. And okay, right now it's a little bit too fast, so going to 30. So we have something like this, right? And now we can start adding some notes on top of it. And now the thing that I'm noticing about it all is that our higher notes are not very prominent, right? That's because the filter closes off for every note. To combat that, we could modulate the cutoff with key/ARP. So if we would go and turn it up to a higher number, maybe like 60, then our higher note has a filter that's more open than it is for the lower notes. Right? Okay, so at this point we have our job more or less done. We have a basic drone, we have a sequence running in the background. We made sure that our higher notes come through a little bit better. And right now, all that's left is to press play and experiment. Right now, I will walk you through how I would jam with that patch if I was recording a video for YouTube. So usually I like to start with things pretty closed off. I like to have my resonance all the way down, the filter closed, the amount of modulation that's happening on the cycling envelope all the way down, the filter envelope amount. I like to have it either very low in the negatives or at 0, and then I'm ready to press play. And you can hear just a little bit of the drone coming through. And then I'm gradually introducing more and more of the harmonic content. The thing with drone music is that you don't want to rush it. You want the entire composition to flow smoothly. You don't want to make big sweeping movements, because that can be very distracting. So I'm just slowly, gradually changing some of the parameters, which complements the movement and modulation that's going on in the mode matrix. And every once in a while, I like to just pick a note in a scale or maybe a small melody and play it over the top of everything that's happening. And because we're using random modulation, it's very hard to predict how it's going to sound, but sometimes it leads to very interesting results. And we can hear that pitch modulation in action the more of my finger is touching the board. I think it cuts off every time the sequence restarts, and the way for me to combat that is to use the USB port on the back and actually program a sequence in my DAW. Then the retriggering doesn't occur as suddenly. For some reason it just works that way. I think it has to do with the internal sequencer of the MicroFreak, but you can work with that rather than against it, so it's not necessarily a downside. Now I'm gradually bringing up the more extreme modulation from the cycling envelope. I'm going to leave it at 50 for now. For example, close the filter slightly, start bringing more resonance. Maybe do a little bit of a sweep. Close the filter a bit more, do another one. For example, introduce more of the cycling envelope modulation. Alright, so I think that we're done here. It's definitely not the best piece I ever created. If I wasn't filming it as a tutorial, I would probably spend more time refining it and making sure that everything is the way I want it to be precisely. I would also use the USB to feed some MIDI into it, maybe make a simple composition that I can play over sporadically. But as for a tutorial piece, I think it highlights everything that I like about drone music and how I approach it, because we definitely have the sense of space coming from reverb, but also the sparsity of the notes. You don't want to overcomplicate your drones. Less is more, especially in this particular genre. And we're also focusing a lot on the sense of movement, both from the modulation and from the gradual introduction of parameter changes by hand. And more or less that's what I do when I'm working with drones. So, I hope that you found this video helpful, that it was useful to you. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you wish to throw some cash my way, I have a Patreon page, or you can buy me a coffee. If not, it's perfectly okay. I hope that you're doing well, and I will see you next time. Take care.